Maria had always felt uneasy walking alone at night, especially after the sun had set and darkness enveloped the city. But she had no choice, for her job at the hospital required her to work long hours, often until the early hours of the morning. As she made her way down the quiet, deserted streets, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the bushes, every creak of the trees, sent shivers down her spine. She knew that she was alone, but she couldn't help but feel as though someone or something was following her. Maria tried to brush off her fears and focus on getting home safely, but her mind kept playing tricks on her. She heard footsteps behind her, but when she turned around, there was no one there. She felt a cold breeze on her neck, but when she looked, there was no one there either. As she walked down a particularly dark alleyway, Maria heard the footsteps again, only this time they were getting closer. She broke into a run, hoping to outrun whoever or whatever was following her, but the footsteps only grew louder, and she knew that she couldn't outrun them. Maria turned around to face her pursuer, and was met with a chilling sight. Standing before her was a figure dressed in a flowing white gown, with long black hair that seemed to float in the air. The figure's face was contorted into a grotesque expression, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. Maria tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out and touched her cheek, and Maria felt an icy chill spread throughout her body. The figure whispered something in a language that Maria couldn't understand, and then disappeared into the night. Maria stumbled home in a daze, her mind reeling from the encounter. She couldn't explain what had just happened, but she knew that it was something that she would never forget. From that day on, she made sure to avoid walking alone at night, and warned her friends and family to do the same. For Maria knew that in the darkness, there were things that lurked, things that were better left unseen. Days turned into weeks, and Maria tried her best to forget about the figure she had encountered. But one night, as she was leaving work, she saw the figure again, standing in the shadows. This time, however, the figure was not alone. Behind it, there were dozens of figures, all dressed in white gowns and staring at her with glowing eyes. Maria knew that she had to run, but her legs refused to move. The figures started to advance towards her, and she could hear their whispering voices. Suddenly, a car pulled up next to her, and the driver shouted at her to get in. Maria jumped in the car, and they sped off into the night. Once she was safely home, Maria realized that she had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. She never walked alone at night again, and made sure to always have someone with her. For Maria knew that in the darkness, there were things that lurked, things that were better left unseen. Emily had grown up in the small town nestled in the Canadian wilderness. It was a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, and crime was almost unheard of. She loved living there, surrounded by the beauty of nature, and she felt safe in her hometown. But that night, something felt different. Emily had worked at the local diner since she was 16, and it was a job she enjoyed. However, the shift that night was different. It was quiet, and the only customers were the regulars who came in for coffee and a late-night snack. After her shift, Emily left the diner, looking forward to a peaceful walk home. But as she walked, she felt a growing sense of unease. It was a cold, dark night, and there was no one around. The silence was deafening, and the only sounds were the crunching of snow under her feet and the occasional gust of wind. Emily knew the town like the back of her hand, but for some reason it felt unfamiliar that night. The streetlights seemed dimmer, and the shadows appeared darker than usual. She quickened her pace, hoping to reach home soon. As she approached the edge of town, she heard a strange noise behind her. She turned around but saw nothing. She dismissed it as her imagination and continued walking. The noise grew louder and closer, and Emily's heart began to race. She tried to calm herself down, but her fear was escalating with every step she took. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. She tried to brush it off as her coat sleeve getting caught, but the noise continued. She could hear breathing in her ear, and she knew she wasn't alone. Emily began to run, her heart pounding in her chest. The breathing grew louder and louder until it was right behind her. Emily turned around, but there was no one there. She kept running, but she could feel someone or something chasing her. Her mind was racing with all sorts of possibilities. Was it an animal? Was someone trying to hurt her? Finally, Emily made it to her front door and quickly slammed it shut behind her. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, and trying to shake off the feeling of being followed. The next day, Emily decided to investigate the strange occurrence from the previous night. She asked around and learned that there had been a string of disappearances in the area. People had reported seeing a figure following them, but when they turned around, no one was there. Emily was terrified. She knew she had narrowly escaped whatever had been following her. From that day on, she never walked alone at night again. She always made sure to have a friend or family member accompany her, no matter how safe she felt. She had learned the hard way that in the darkness, anything could happen. Emma had always been a hard worker. She was dedicated to her job and often stayed late to finish projects. On this particular night, she had been working on a report that was due the next day. It was already past midnight when she finally left the office, and she knew she was going to have to walk home alone. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of her. Emma pulled her coat tighter around her body and tried to keep her head down. She was almost halfway home when she began to feel like she was being followed. At first, she tried to ignore the feeling, thinking it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the more she walked, the stronger the feeling became. It was like there was something or someone watching her every move. Emma's heart began to race, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. She decided to pick up her pace and make it home as quickly as possible. But as she turned down an empty street, she heard a loud noise coming from an old abandoned building. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound stopped, but Emma could feel her heart racing faster than ever. She tried to rationalize the noise away, thinking it was just an animal or the wind. But her mind kept playing tricks on her, and she started to hear strange noises coming from the shadows. Emma tried to keep walking, but the feeling that someone was watching her only grew stronger. She began to hear footsteps behind her, but every time she turned around, there was no one there. The feeling of being watched became overwhelming, and she started to run. As she ran, she turned down a side street and saw a tall, dark figure standing in the shadows. She tried to run past it, but it reached out and grabbed her arm. Emma screamed, but no one came to her aid. The figure pulled her closer, and she could smell the foul stench of decay coming from it. Emma tried to break free, but the figure was too strong. It dragged her into the darkness, and her screams echoed through the empty streets. The next day, Emma's co-workers arrived at the office to find that she had not returned home. They searched for her, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Her disappearance was never solved, and to this day, people talk about the strange happenings on that rainy night. Some say that they have seen a dark figure lurking in the shadows, and that it is the same figure that took Emma. Others say that on rainy nights, they can hear her screams echoing through the deserted streets. Whatever the truth may be, Emma's disappearance remains a chilling mystery, and a warning to all those who walk alone at night. Thanks for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us out, and until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.